Okay, well, welcome to our presentation on aquatic invasive species in Bristol and Monkton Ponds. I'm Kate Kelly. I work with Lewis Creek Association, and I am here to introduce Matt Gorton, who's the contractor who has worked with us for the past 3 years now to establish a boat launch steward program at Bristol and Monkton Ponds. Boat launch stewards check boats as they go in and out of the ponds. And Matt's going to give us a brief presentation on what the stewards did there this summer, how many boats they checked, all that information, talk a little bit about some of the aquatic invasive species that are in those ponds. And then I'm going to give a quick summary of our removal day that we spent at the ponds this year with some staff from the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and just talk a little bit about what we did and what we saw out there at Bristol Pond. So Matt, with that, feel free to take it away.
Sounds good. I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So yeah, as Kate said, I'm Matt Gorton, and I've been overseeing Lewis Creek Association's boat launch steward program for the past 3 years. We started the program in 2020 at Bristol Pond, and due to a very successful season, we decided to expand it to Monkton Pond in the summer of 2021. And as Kate said, I'm just going to give a brief overview of what aquatic invasive species are, how to prevent their spread, and some of the details about our program. So as many of you may or may not know, or may be wondering, what invasive species are. Aquatic invasive species are non-native and they cause damage to the environment, the economy, or human health. The Lake Champlain Basin has around 51 non-native species, and around 12 of these are non-native species are invasive. And aquatic invasive species can choke out waterways, killing off other species and preventing waterfowl from landing. This first photo right here, this was taken in the southern portion of the Lake Champlain, and it's just showing a dense water chestnut mat. And aquatic invasive species can also cause damage to infrastructure, leading to millions of dollars in repairs. This photo is just showing the impacts that zebra mussels can have on water pipes. And as you can see, these zebra mussels form pretty impenetrable layer to our barrier to water movement. And then lastly, aquatic invasive species often prevent recreational activities such as swimming, fishing, and boating. And this is what we were primarily interested in with our program. As you can see here, there's a lot of weeds on this boat. Not all of them are invasive. Some of them are native, but native plants can become invasive in other bodies of water that they don't naturally occur in. So it's very important to remove them regardless of their status. So now I'm just gonna discuss which aquatic invasive species are present in Bristol and Monkton Ponds. So the first one is European frogbit, and it's native to Europe and Asia, and it was introduced to North America via Canada in the 1930s. Frogbit forms these thick mats in still to slow moving water, and these mats decrease water, oxygen, and light levels, killing native plants and animals. They also negatively impact waterfowl and fish feeding and movements, and they also ensnare boat props, making boating difficult and sometimes impossible. Frogbit is found at Bristol Pond, but not at Monkton Pond. But due to their close proximity, it is a pretty substantial threat to Monkton Pond, and we really do want to keep it out. And this photo right here is just an example of a dense frogbit mat at Bristol Pond. And then we also have Eurasian water milfoil, which is native to Europe, Africa, and Asia, and it was introduced to North America via Chesapeake Bay in the late 1800s. Eurasian water milfoil also forms thick mats in still to slow moving water, except this is fully aquatic or fully submerged, whereas frogbit tends to be on the surface. Eurasian water milfoil is found in waters up to 20 feet deep, and these mats will decrease water oxygen and light levels, killing native plants and animals. They negatively impact fish feeding and movement, as well as spawning, and they ensnare boat props, making boating difficult. This plant is found in both ponds, and it's quite They're quite bad infestations in both of the ponds, unfortunately. And then we have curly leaf pondweed, which is native to Europe, Africa, Australia, and Asia. And it was introduced to North America in 1860s via California. Curly leaf pondweed forms thick mats as well. Same type of water, slow moving. All of them seem to like the same types of water. And this one can be found up to 13 feet deep. And curly leaf pondweed starts growing earlier in the spring than other plants. So this allows it to outcompete native plants. And once again, it forms these thick mats that impede fish movement and ensnare boat props. Curly leaf pondweed is found only at Monkton Pond, but not at Bristol Pond. And most of it is concentrated in the southern portion of the pond and around the boat launch itself. And then the newest invasive species in our two ponds is brittle naiad. I should rephrase that. It's only found in Bristol Pond. And it was found last year by our boat launch stewards. It's native to Europe and Asia, and it also forms dense mats in still water up to 13 feet deep. And these ones also decrease oxygen levels within the water, and it grows earlier than other plants, which allows them to block sunlight from getting to native plants. And once again, it negatively impacts fish and waterfowl movement, and it ensnares boat props. So the most effective way to combat invasive species is to prevent their spread to other bodies of water. Therefore, always remember to clean, drain, and dry your boat equipment, shoes, life jackets, and fishing equipment when you leave any body of water. So now I'm just gonna discuss the Boat Launch Steward program. This is a picture of one of our stewards, Sam. He's inspecting a kayak at Bristol Pond. The boat launch stewards were typically at the ponds Friday through Sunday between 7 a.m. and 2 p.m. However, it did vary sometimes just due to, wanting to change it up every now and again to see or to get other time frames. And then while performing their duties, the boat launch stewards would record the watercraft type, the group size, the state of registration, if the visitor was launching or retrieving their watercraft, the time of inspection, if the boater had any previous contact with boat launch stewards, if the visitor accepted or refused the inspection, if the visitor took any aquatic invasive species spread prevention steps, what species were found on the watercraft, the last watercraft or last water body visited in the 2 weeks prior to the inspection, and what water body the visitor would go to next. So the boat launch stewards interacted with 312 watercraft at Bristol Pond and 113 watercraft at Monkton Pond. Surprisingly, only 4 individuals refused to have their watercraft inspected for aquatic invasive species. And the most interactions with visitors occurred in July. And the majority of boaters at Bristol Pond were kayakers and motorboats. It was a tie between the two. They both had 127 motorboats and kayaks visit the pond. And then Monkton Pond, the majority of boaters were kayakers, followed by motorboats. And the vast majority of boaters were from Vermont, but we did have visitors coming as far away as the Gulf of Mexico. So this program, is really important at, preventing things from other states getting into our waters as well, and also from things going out of the state. For instance, a lot of our visitors do go up to the Adirondacks, and a lot of those ponds have 0 aquatic invasive species. So it's really important to instill in visitors that it is important to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. And 95.6% of visitors at Bristol Pond and 95.5% of visitors at Monkton Pond did take aquatic invasive species spread prevention measures before visiting the ponds. And this was pretty significant considering that last year only around 64% of boaters took aquatic invasive species spread prevention measures at Monkton Pond. So I think our program's really getting through to boaters, and not just our program, but other boat launch steward programs as well. So most watercraft did not have any aquatic plants on them while launching into or retrieving from the ponds. Last year, most watercraft did have aquatic vegetation on them when they were retrieving from the ponds. So this may be due to some natural variation in growing conditions, but it also could be evidence of the program having its intended effect, especially the lack of boaters coming into the pond with aquatic plants on their watercraft. And Eurasian water milfoil and native pond weeds were the most commonly found plants on watercraft or their trailers. The boat launch stewards found most of the aquatic plants on motorboats, which was probably due to there being more pieces of equipment protruding into the water compared to other watercraft types. So you have your prop that's hanging in the water. All the other watercraft are pretty smooth on the bottom, so they didn't really snare anything. And our third year of our program was successful in intercepting aquatic invasive species and educating the public on the issues surrounding aquatic invasive species. And the vast majority of visitors to Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond seemed to be excited to have the program there. And many people from the community went to the ponds to see the stewards in action and to ask them questions regarding primarily aquatic invasive species stuff, but also other natural resources questions. And furthermore, visual inspections and hand removal of aquatic vegetation has been shown to be extremely effective at preventing aquatic invasive species from spreading to other bodies of water. Lewis Creek Association boat launch steward program could potentially prevent both directly and indirectly aquatic invasive species from spreading to other uninfested water bodies. And Lewis Creek Association intends to continue its stewardship program at Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond next summer as well. And I just wanted to reiterate that the most effective way of preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species is to clean, drain, and dry your watercraft and equipment. It's really important. It's really easy to do. It takes 5 minutes at most. And you could be preventing infestations from occurring just by doing that. And this program wouldn't have been possible without the funding that was provided by NEWPIC in partnership with the Lake Champlain Basin program. So thank you for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Really interesting. Yeah, let me just do my picture again. There, I think. One of the things, to go back to the beginning a bit, that's still confusing me is when you say 13, that something can exist in 13 feet of water or 20 feet down. Does that mean that does it have its roots in the bottom of the pond? It's not all floating. It actually is like a plant. It has to have its feet in the ground.
Exactly. Yeah. The ones that I was referring to being 20 feet, 13 feet, etc. Those are ones that have to be rooted. And one of the things that impacts that is the water clarity. So for instance, if you have a filter feeder like zebra mussels in a water body, they can actually make the water clarity better. So more sunlight can penetrate. So some species can actually be deeper in the water. But yeah, that's just referring to how deep they can root typically.
And what do you, when I have a kayak, for example, and I haven't used it in a while, but if I were to go kayaking and I take it out of the water, and assuming there's no boat steward there, do I rinse it down with like a mix of vinegar and water, or is there any optimal soap solution? What's the recommended thing?
Yeah, so the best thing is hot water. Boiling hot water will kill most things. And ensuring that it is actually dry is the most important thing, and removing any vegetation, because of a lot of these plants can actually, an infestation can start from just a single piece of a plant. So it's really important to get those out, make sure they're dry and actually dead. But the biggest thing is to make sure that it is dry, and bone dry, because a zebra mussel, for instance, their veligers, which are their larval stage, are extremely tiny, and they could persist in a single drop of water. Same thing with spiny water fleas and stuff like that. So as long as you're making sure it's clean, drain, and dry, you'll be doing your part, and you won't be causing any future infestations. Some people say you should wait 2 days before going to another place if you're letting it air dry, but that's not actually a great recommendation because of that can vary depending on you know, humidity and stuff like that. So as long as you're actually making sure that it's dry, you could do it, you know, everything from wiping it down to anything to make it sure it's dry would be important in that situation.
Well, when I first came here 20 something years ago, I had an encounter with a zebra mussel in the lake. Did they, I mean, were they just beginning back then, do you think? And would I not have even found them in a pond, but now you can?
Yeah, so they've been in Lake Champlain for quite some time now. I think it's either the late 80s or early 90s. But a lot of the other ponds like Lake Bomazine are really recent. So yeah, I mean, 26 years ago would have been when they were first starting to come. And I believe that they started in the southern portion of the lake through the Champlain Canal. Unfortunately, canals are another big spreader of invasive species because they connect bodies of water that may not have been connected previously. So unfortunately, yeah, 26 years ago sounds about right as far as when they started coming.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the place, but it's south of here, south of Heinsberg. On the, you know, it's a cove sort of situation, and I was walking barefoot, and so it was quite a sharp encounter.
Yeah. I know Button Bay, for instance, was one of the first places I remember.
Button Bay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm originally from this area, so we'd go for school trips and be like, oh my gosh, there's zebra mussels. Oh no. So
too bad they're not edible.
They may be.
Just very small. You have to collect a lot of zebra mussels.
For a very ever. Well, my granddaughter goes to Key Wade. Well, she's a girl, so she goes to Sangadiwan. But do you all do presentations down there, or have you done that, Matt?
I haven't given any presentations to any camps. Most of my presentations are in this regard, or conservation commission affiliated. But yeah, I'm currently working on getting a project together for invasive species and impacts on turtles. So I will be trying to give some presentations on that in the future.
I'm sure the kids would be really interested. I don't know how big off Lake Dunmore is. I mean, it's got several different public access places plus the camps, and
yeah, it's definitely a high risk place for the spread.
Yeah, and you do see, we have friends who have a summer place there, and you know, you just see so many motorboats speeding by, and I guess, you know, it depends on whether a piece of it is that some boats are kept by the owners at the lake and don't go anywhere. So it can be, you know, I shouldn't look at them and think, oh, they could be not doing their best to prevent frog bit.
Yeah, and I do know at Lake Dunmore, I think it's through DEC, Vermont DEC, they do have a boat launch program as well. I do know they had a zebra mussel scare there a couple years ago. I don't think they ended up finding any, but it is unfortunately a very popular lake, and it seems like it's only a matter of time before other species spread there. So I do know there's milfoil at the very least there, but yeah.
Well, this is more for Kate, I guess. Are there people doing pulling ups? I know that there was all sorts of efforts at Lake Iroquois, and then they ended up using the chemical of some kind, was it?
Yep, they used the new Priscillicor, I think is the name for the milfoil. And I'm sorry, the question was about
do you think that there's sufficient programs and people taking part in them? Because it's so much about volunteerism to get a really really effective long-term.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, it's actually a nice lead into my portion of the presentation. So if you don't mind, I will take that away, and then if I forget, remind me, and I'll come back to your question. Thank you for the nice segue. Okay, so I'm going to just talk very briefly about a volunteer removal day for aquatic invasive species that we held this summer at Bristol Pond. We chose Bristol Pond because of the brittle naiad that Matt was mentioning that was found there. Brittle naiad was a fairly new discovery. They just found it, our boat launch stewards found it a year ago, well, now a year and a half ago, and decided that because it was a fairly new discovery in that pond, there was a fairly small clump of it that we felt like we could make an effort to remove it, or at least to control it before it spreads throughout the rest of the pond. So unlike something like the milfoil that is already covering the entire pond, we have very little chance of actually doing much about that without like an herbicide treatment or something like that. It made sense to try to get some crew together to get out there. So we held a day in combination with the Lake Champlain Basin Program boat launch stewards, which is two of the folks you're looking at here. So these are some of the guys who sit at the boat launches along Lake Champlain. And we also had some staff from Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. And we met up there. There were about 12 of us. We also had one community volunteer. And we had a little discussion about frogbit on the left of the screen and this brittle naiad on the right of the screen. And there's a group of sort of a clump of brittle naiad around the dock, which you're looking at here, and sort of along the edges of the waterway leading out into Bristol Pond, like where the boats launch. Many of the groups set out to just do some frogbit removal, which has really never been done there. So that's what you're looking at here. These guys with big clumps of frogbit and in their baskets and their sleds on their kayaks. Here's yours truly observing. I actually had done some work, I promise. I was taking a break. And three of us, stayed around the boat launch and pulled those little tiny brittle naiad plants, which unfortunately break very easily, as their name implies, brittle. So you had to be very careful and just gently pull the plants out by the roots and try to, get them up into a bucket. So at the end of the day, we had quite a truckload. Most of this, of course, is frogbit and some other muck that came along with it. But we did do a fairly good job of getting a good clump of that brittle naiad out near the boat launch. There is still naiad there. It's not like we got rid of it entirely or controlled it entirely. There's still some near the boat launch and going out those channels out into the pond. So unfortunately, there's some more work to be done. And I hope that, in this coming year, hopefully we can still continue to tackle it, whether it's through the boat launch stewards or, through a volunteer day like this. You do have to have kind of a strong back. At least for us, we were actually bending over and picking it out from the ground. But I suppose someone with a snorkel who was willing to swim around could also do some similar work. So that is all I have on our removal day. And I will just say that as I work to do our application to the Lake Champlain Basin program again this year for this program, we do hope to include some removal time, but also we're considering including some time for knotweed removal. So knotweed is sort of a terrestrial invasive plant, but it often grows along riverbanks and in those sort of disturbed soils. It can also cause a lot of soil erosion and really sort of loosen the soils along the riverbanks. So we're probably going to be doing some, if we get some funding, going to be doing some knotweed work next year, and you'll probably be hearing from us about our demonstration sites. And we're going to try to potentially start an iNaturalist what's the word I'm looking for? A project, I guess, where folks can help report knotweed near them. So we can try to determine like, okay, how widespread is it and how big of a patch is it and all those sorts of things. So that will hopefully be upcoming in the next year or two, but fingers crossed that we get the funding for that. Same thing with the boat launch steward program. Hopefully that will continue next year. So I guess to get back to your question, Kate, it is a challenge. I mean, most of the people who showed up for that day were staff who were being paid to be there. They were boat launch stewards and they were DEC folks who do this all summer. We did have that one community volunteer show up who just loved the pond, and he fishes there a lot. And he said, you know, if you guys are out here doing this, I should show up too. But, you know, as far as like the number of volunteers needed to really make a dent, you know, it would take some time. And for something like, I mean, if you want to talk about something like milfoil, where it really is a huge infestation, you know, if you don't catch it right when it starts, I guess that's part of the problem is once it's gone too far, it's like, it's really going to be a challenge to get out of there. So that's really one of our goals, to try to stop it before it starts, or to catch it when it starts, so we can hopefully make a change before it spreads super far.
I don't know either of the ponds. So is it at all like Lake Iroquois, where there are people with docks of their own there, and, you know, weekend houses or summer houses or whatever? Or are they more pristine than that?
Yeah, Bristol Pond is very pristine. I mean, there are a handful of camps along one side, but just on like a portion of one side, one shoreline, a farm down at sort of the other end, but nothing, not like Lake Iroquois, I guess I'll put it that way. And Monkton Pond is maybe a little more populated, but I would say still less so than Iroquois, if I had to judge it.
I was just wondering about the people who do live there being trained, wanting to be trained to recognize these invasives and to be able to take action. You were mentioning, of course, that this naiad, whatever it's called, it was near the dock. Yeah. And not that there aren't other plants that gather around those areas, but that, you know, it would be something that a family might want to do for early in the season, or whenever it's most effective, just for their own sake.
Yeah, I think if, you know, my guess is if there were more people there, or a stronger, like, you know, group of camp owners or whatever it was, that might be a good way to go about it. But unfortunately, I guess at least at Bristol Pond, there's not too many people who are actually there. The people in and out are launching their boats.
I mean, could they get a mailing or something that would educate them about what they're seeing? And then they could take it from there, because of course the mailing could say, if you're interested in learning more or in volunteering, you know, you can be in touch with the Lewis Creek Association or with the Champlain Basin, whatever group would be most likely to be able to come in. Because I mean, I know if I had access to a, you know, lovely place like that, I sure wouldn't want to not recognize it. Just for starters, I would like to know what I'm seeing,
right, and
be able to maybe do some preventive work.
Yeah, I think DEC does have an interesting program, Vermont Invasives Patrollers, I believe. And so they train people who can go, you know, sort of adopt a lake, I guess, if you will, and go out and do your surveys a few times a year, look for those invasive plants, and try to note them before they become a problem. And maybe getting something like that up and running if we had, you know, an interested citizen who is there frequently enough, either someone who lives there or just is on the pond a lot, who could sort of be that person. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. It's been really interesting.
You're very welcome. Thanks.
Keep on fighting the good fight, as they say.
Yeah. Thank you for coming and for your good questions. And we will we'll be in touch, and maybe we'll see you out on the pond next year. It is a beautiful spot for a paddle.
Okay.
That should with your kayak.
Maybe get my granddaughter to come with me or something. So I've been thinking about getting going again. It more has to do with getting I used to have a car with an easy thing where you could put the kayak on top.
Yeah.
And that car bit the dust, and the next car, it was much more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main struggle, isn't it? Just figuring it out, getting the boat up there.
I just need to learn more about that. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks.
Night. Night.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Matt.